So of course, it's entirely impossible to get any sense of what went in the fellowship of the Godhead that would lead the Son of God to become Jesus of Nazareth. It's just beyond us, of course, and it's beyond us just as much as when he came to the earth. It's beyond our comprehension, but by the Spirit of God, the Lord wants us to seek him so that we understand, so that we can worship him in spirit and in truth. That's what Jesus told to the Samaritan woman, that she has to proceed in that direction. Not just worshiping. Anyone can worship. You know, you can worship idols. You can even worship Jesus and not worship him in spirit and truth. I mean, how is that? How can you worship Jesus and not worship him in spirit and in truth? It's by worshiping his memory. It's by worshiping him through your lens and not seeking the revelation appropriate for the mystery. I mean, when I think about, in some ways I dread Christmas and Easter because they are so profound that I feel like everything I'm going to say is close to blasphemy because of its discounting the magnificence of what the Lord has done. And so I ask the Lord for mercy every time we enter those feast days, because I want to appreciate who the Lord is. I want to have my life reflect who he is. So, the wise men brought gifts, as we know. They brought gold and silver, gold and myrrh and frankincense. And they were honoring him because, they didn't know much who he was. They had a revelation that the King of the Jews was going to be born. God gave them a revelation that the Jews didn't even receive. And they came and they knew that they just had to honor him appropriately. So they honored him by what they understood a king should receive. They didn't honor him according to what maybe today we might think is appropriate for a child. Let's give him a rattle, or let's give him some toy that they can play with. They gave him gifts that fit a king. But they still had no idea what they were doing, really. Not fully. They had some idea. But, they had revelation that God was doing something. And it's probably true the divine light was upon them. Somehow that star was involved. And it didn't lead them all the way, though, as the movies or cartoons portray. But they saw it, and they knew that it was a sign of something significant. So they didn't just sit around and talk about it. They thought something significant was going to happen, so they moved. They moved their bodies from one place to another because it was something that moved them physically and in their hearts. They couldn't just sit there and talk about it. They needed to go and worship him. And so they worshiped him, but as we know, they didn't fully understand, but they understood enough. And I think that in some ways that's us, especially when we're not making the connection that worship is offering our whole lives in return for what he did for us. Our whole lives, everything. We talked a little bit about retreat on the retreat about honor. And honor is an expression of esteem that costs something. It's an expression of love, but it's in some ways a recognition of us bowing in the presence of something that's higher and more important than us. That we recognize that we're not to live for our own glory or our self-honor, but we recognize that we're to live for the honor of God. And to live for the honor of God isn't like, you get a touchdown and you kind of say, you stick your hand in the air like God did that. It's like the whole contours of our lives are shaped by the reality of what God has done for us. We know that honor actually is something that's connected to treasure or wealth. The way that the wise men offered honor to the baby Jesus, or I should say the young child. We don't really know the age exactly, and it probably wasn't a baby. But nonetheless, They did offer homage to the Lord, and they expressed it by going there, I don't know how many hundreds of miles from the east, and by offering gifts. Because it would have been inappropriate not to show reverence for what God has revealed to them. But now we see it all. I mean, we see that God has come in the flesh. They would be shocked if they were to know that at that time, but they were just grasping the part of the mystery that they could receive. But we now understand that Jesus was the God-man. I mean, even if a small child, can you imagine just looking into his eyes and then knowing that what we know now and thinking, this is God? And he's come as a child? I mean, you would think, what's more appropriate that he come as a strong 30-year-old all of a sudden from the mountain someplace? But he had to communicate to us that his whole life was given up for us and that he esteemed us. You see, what you're willing to pay for something is what, in a way, you're giving honor to it. I mean, if you buy a car and it costs like $20,000 or $30,000, you're going to probably think it's a decent car. It may not be a new car, but it's a decent car. But if you said, I bought a car for $15, you're going to go and look at that car, and it's probably going to be a junker and may not even be able to move. And why you think that is because we know that the amount of money communicates how valuable it is. And we know lots of people are confused about their own value. I mean, like even some people would think, well, I don't know what I'm worth. Or they might be hearing their father or mother when they were growing up, you know, you're going to amount to nothing. You know, what are you worth? What can you do? And they're thinking, not much, I guess. And look at your life. But when you look at it from God's point of view, every single person isn't worth, $30,000, but is worth God doing something of cosmic significance that left shock waves into the heavens, and the demons shook for this mystery that God himself would show up. And he'd show up as a child to make it really clear that he's not only empathizing with us, but in every respect, he's one with us, because that is also the expression of love, full and complete identification. And so we will never wonder whether God understands or whether he can understand our situation, because he himself became a child and then grew up as a man to be offered up himself. But he did that so that he could speak to us, he could embrace us with human arms, that he could perform miracles, that he could outstretch his hands so they could be nailed to a cross, that he freely gave himself because he says you're worth that much to him, that you're that valuable to him, that you're not something loved on, you are something highly esteemed, because the amount that God himself paid is without really any calculation, because we're talking about the Son of God becoming the God-man, Jesus Christ. And that says, you are that important to me that I will do something that will be of eternal significance and will affect me, so that at the right hand of God, there still is the man Jesus of Nazareth. He didn't just shed off his humanity, but he embraced it to let us know that this was something that he wants for all of us, to understand that his love for us is constant and eternal, and also to understand just as he's at the right hand, so now through him we will be at the right hand. This is love that is not just in the moment of the incarnation, and not just even in the crucifixion, but it's all the time in the giving of the Holy Spirit and his ascension to bring us to his Father. And he says, you're worth that. You're that valuable to him. Because love thinks that way, acts that way. Pure love, the love of God. And so when we see that, we think, well, God, I must give you my whole life. How can I not give you my life when you've given me more than just good things. You've given me yourself. You've given me the kingdom. You've given me your very spirit you share with me. The inheritance you share with me. The kingdom you give to me. So how can I not give you honor by not just giving a tithe or alms, and not just praying here and there, but that someone would look at us and they'd think, man, you've offered your entire life to God. You're not living for anything else. That would be the appropriate response. And even though you may fail at that, it's really clear that you have a resolve, that you want to give everything you are in gratitude to God. Not because you have to in a legalistic sense, but you have to because, like Paul says, the love of Christ constrains us. If he offered up his life for us, how can we not also offer our life for him? That's true worship. That's worship in spirit and truth. When it engages our lives, and when we seek to think after his thoughts, and when we plan our life with the one aim, that we would will the will of God, that we would give our hearts and our lives to desire what he desires, so that we could be one with him in all respects, because that was his divine plan, because he was one with us in all respects. So that's an encouragement to us that God can do a miracle, not only in the incarnation, but in our incarnation by grace. And he can do a miracle that we could actually love like God if we let the mystery soak into our soul and our spirit, and we gave him the honor that we believe he is due. And that's how we live a life of worship that truly celebrates the reality of God showing up, because he was so concerned for us, and he offered himself and doesn't hold anything back of who he is. That's who he is. And that leads us to be inspired with the same impulse and the same resolve, because that's the only thing that's fitting, given this massive, significant manifestation of the Lord who has walked upon the earth for us and now sits for us on the right hand and awaits us to be sitting alongside with him. Christ is born.
Let us glorify him.
Amen.